Yeah, hello everyone, and welcome to the first part of the Q&A videos that we planned throughout the lecture. I have with me here a noble friend of mine, Saif. You probably do not know him, but I think he will say a few words about himself now, and then we will start with the questions. I think we have 33 in total. Will be a bit longer video, but we want to address all your questions. So Saif.
Hi, I'm Saif. Like Flav said, I'm just kind of some random guy at the moment, but I've been into Buddhism for a few years now, and I've known Flav for a few years as well, and we've talked a lot about Buddhism over the years, and kind of grown in our views and practices a lot over the time. So I think we've settled into a place where we have like very similar views, but also sort of different backgrounds. Since I'm like my background more in philosophy, whereas Flaus is very much into the hard sciences. So possibly I can give some different perspective, perhaps, to some of the questions.
Yeah, that sounds actually very good. I'm very certain that you have very valuable and different viewpoints when it comes to anything philosophical, because I'm very focused on Sutta Buddhism and not much else. But yeah, anyway, I will just pull the first slide onto the screen, the first question. It is from Xenochrist Amu, and he is asking, when you say uprooting of suffering with wisdom, or uprooting of Tanha in certain chapters, do you mean interrupting the dependent origination and hence removing the causes of suffering in that moment immediately, or is it something deeper than that? Yeah, maybe you want to answer that, or I can. Well,
I'll give it a go, sure. Yes, so with uprooting of suffering, it definitely means something deeper than that. Uprooting of suffering means that it's pulled out of its root forever, basically. In terms of removing the cause of suffering in that moment immediately, that isn't really something that's possible in the practice. When suffering arises, at that point, it's sort of too late at that point. You kind of just have to endure it, and then in the future, not proliferate, acting out of craving to get to that point. Because if you proliferate the attitude of trying to remove the suffering immediately, that's sort of the same attitude of sensuality, which when pain arises, you try to replace it in the moment. Whereas if you're trying to uproot it, it has to be something much more deep than that. And it's actually the opposite direction, where when the suffering arises, you endure it instead. And then with the patient endurance, when that increases, that's how you can uproot it on a more deeper level, basically.
Yeah. Well, the part, I will just add one or two more words. It's actually exactly my opinion on it. Just a few words. Interrupting the chain of dependent origination is actually right. So you kind of interrupt it at the level of ignorance, but then suffering cannot arise anymore. So if suffering arises, then it is, as Saif said, already too late. So then you are already affected by it, and then you can do nothing but endure it. Otherwise, you are strengthening the same principle that made suffering arise in the first place. And that's kind of what we try to avoid. Yeah. So in one part, it's deeper than that, because the arising of suffering is already too late. And on the other end, yeah, interrupting the dependent origination chain is exactly what we try to achieve. But we have to...
It's just the interrupting has to be on the, a level of interrupting it for good, rather than just like a momentary thing. Well, yeah, you're right.
Absolutely. The momentary is too late. It should not be there anymore. It should not be possible for it to even surface, if that makes sense. Yeah, perfect. I guess we can just go to the next question, which is also from Xenochrist Amu. And he asks, I would think that there are two levels to the Dhamma. One, knowing dependent origination, craving, clinging, can be prevented from happening, or if it happens, can be prevented from causing suffering. The second layer, dependent origination has been stopped forever completely. Formations don't arise, karma is ended, craving related to certain fetters cannot arise, so there is no need to prevent anything. For that fetter, suffering is does not arise. Which one are we talking about here? Well, I guess we kinda have already answered that in the first question. We are pretty much talking about the kind of practice where suffering simply does not arise anymore. So this is not a management technique. This is not you sit down to meditate to alleviate stress or suffering. Stress is simply gone. Your chitta, your I don't have really a good word for it. Tero translates it as mood. Your heart, mind, or whatever, what you pretty much perceive and feel, is liberated, and then you do not suffer anymore. This is the idea behind it. Do you have anything to add on that question?
So yeah, that deeper aspect is kind of really the only aspect of the Dhamma. The first one is kind of the opposite direction. So yeah, that second idea of dependent duration is the correct one. It's really like the only correct one.
Yeah. Yeah, that's quite important, because I feel like many people who start practicing Buddhism or get interested into Buddhism kinda go with the first option and later realize that there might be a mistake.
Yeah, because the first one is sort of more immediate. With the second one, it takes a lot more patience and time. And so that takes a lot of patience, basically.
Yeah. I mean, the Buddha said that it is a gradual training and that we have to repeat things over and over, but it's not a very inviting or enticing thought. So most people prefer the former because it feels more instant. Yeah. I think that answered that question. Let us move to the next. I will just read it, but I hope it will also be displayed on the screen, but we will see. Oh God, I'm not good with the names. Shashi Kumar. I guess one of my questions pertains to the dissolution of Kamma. Is there a quick way to dissolve it, or is it a numbers game? Try as much as you can to generate good Kamma over bad, but isn't that in itself a wrong intent? Or in other words, I want to do good only because that I want enlightenment and not because it's unconditional. So would that mean inaction is better than action here, if the true goal is the cessation of craving?
Okay. There's a lot of aspects to this question.
Is that it?
In the first, I'll answer the second one first. In the wanting to do good only because you want enlightenment, is that a wrong intent? I would say that's the correct intent. That's it's intent that's like it's with craving, but it's a good sort of craving because it'll put you in the right direction. If you proliferate that sort of intent. At the beginning, you can't really immediately jump into not self and so on. So having these sorts of intents that are not perfect but will push you in the right direction are very good. In terms of the dissolution of karma, I'm not 100% sure if I'm being completely exact in my understanding of karma, but maybe Flaus can add on to it. But my understanding is that you can't really like dissolve karma, so to speak. The karma sort of stays there, and if you have negative karma, you'll have to reap its effects. But what you can do is basically develop discernment, and if you abandon self-view, then there is no longer someone who undergoes that karma, basically. So you stop being affected by it, even when it's being reaped. And to do that, you're quite right that you have to generate good karma first. Simply because you do have self-view, you are creating karma. So it's better to create good karma versus bad karma. So you develop generosity, develop virtue, develop sense restraint, all of these sorts of good karma. And then from then, you can jump over into developing discernment, developing the not self. And that's how you can stop basically producing any karma at all. So you develop good karma and then use that as a jumping point to stop producing any karma at all by dissolving your sense of ownership, basically. And then once you do that, you stop developing karma altogether, and then any leftover karma will be reaped, but you will not be affected by it. So action is what you need to do at the beginning, and then at some point, I don't know if inaction is the right word, but yeah, you stop proliferating the sense of ownership, that sense of acting that's associated with self. And then, yeah, that's the cessation of craving and the cessation of karma.
Yeah, that's actually exactly my view, but our views are very similar, so that comes as no surprise. One point I might want to add is about the word inaction, because that is one that is very easily misunderstood. Inaction does not mean passivity. Things are still happening. Your body is still doing things. There are still thoughts. There are still all those things. The only thing that is gone is the ownership. That is what the Buddha meant by, well, non-self, pretty much. So it's not that you just sit and can't do anything anymore. You are not becoming a vegetable or anything. It's just the ownership is gone. That is a part of the, well, let's say, chain of dependent origination that is removed. The self, the ownership, the rest stays. As long as you have a body, there is experience. There are the 5 aggregates, as the Buddha put it. So the Arahant still functions quite normally. Even the noble disciple, it's functioning perfectly normal. But there's a very deep-rooted shift in perception, let's put it like that. But I guess we have further questions on that. So I think that's pretty much enough for this one. I think you answered it in a lot of detail. And I also have nothing to add on the Kamma part, actually. That's also my understanding. Well, let's move on. Carrot Xauxi asks if there is any relationship between karma and rebirth. And in another video you said our rebirth being will be caused by our deeds, thoughts. Thank you. If I understand the question correctly, Xauxi wants to know if there is any relationship between karma and rebirth. Yes, that is. I mean, the Buddha said that we are pretty much the owners of our karma, the owners of our actions and choices, pretty much. And yeah, our rebirth destinations in any way is pretty much decided by our karma. The Buddha said that that is the only thing that we truly can call our own, the results of our actions, pretty much. And we will be reborn in a place that fits our karma, our choices that we made in this very life. And it's pretty much a continuation, looking for a new viewpoint in the 5 aggregates, pretty much. That's maybe a good way to think about it. So yeah, rebirth is caused by our deeds. So as long as we are doing things actively, there will be rebirth. That is why the Arahant stops karma altogether, and he will not be reborn. So he has no rebirth destination. The term rebirth does not apply anymore. I hope that answers the questions. Maybe you have something to add on it.
Nope, fully agreed.
Okay. In that case, let's come to the next question. That's yours again. And Trace Reaper wants to know, what are your thoughts on Vernon Howard and his teachings? And this one might be a bit tricky. Maybe you know the guy better than I do. I just have done a quick Google search.
Yeah, I looked him up a little bit. I don't know them in much detail, really. But there is this thing in general that there's a lot of like spiritual teachers or even traditions that are quite similar to the Buddhist teachings in a lot of ways, especially when it comes to like non-ownership and awareness and so on. But in general, I would say that there is a sort of like depth to the Buddha's wisdom that it's kind of difficult to see at the beginning, but it's one aspect of the manifestation of the depth of his wisdom is the way he decides to word things, because there are like a million ways in which you can word the doctrine. You can put focus on some aspects more than others, and different traditions will put more focus on different aspects. But the way the Buddhist teaching is worded and the very specificity of it is all completely perfectly worded to gear you towards the exact things you need for liberation. And I would say in general, you should just trust the suttas as your refuge, basically. Because otherwise, like other teachers, there's a lot of similar things, but you can also get caught up in wrong attention and wrong places. And also it's a serious path as well, so you could end up in quite bad places, whereas the Buddha will keep you on the straight road. Yeah.
So any more words maybe directly on Vernon Howard? Maybe a few, if you know, because I'm not very well versed on the guy. I just did a quick search and found a few terms that matched the Buddha's teachings, but not in its entirety.
I can't talk like in too much specifics, but from what I read, there seemed to be a lot of like a sort of magical quality to his thinking, which in terms of like getting what you want out of this non-awareness, awareness, which I think it's not completely accurate, because in the Buddhist doctrine as well, you gain power over yourself and over sort of the way your reality manifests in a way, in terms of the different psychic powers and so on. The way the Buddha, he doesn't put focus on it, and he instead puts focus on non-ownership. Whereas I think other teachers, like Vernon Howard, and there's others like Neville Goddard and so on, they put focus on like sort of relinquishing, but at the same time sort of controlling your reality through it. And I think this aspect of it seems very appealing, but can often, in fact, proliferate self-view further in terms of that sense of ownership over reality. But that's about the most I could say about it without getting into super specifics with regards to Vernon.
That sounds like much more than I could say about the guy. Because I'm very limited in my philosophical knowledge to very few people that either have a computer science background or to the Buddha himself. So thank you very much for answering that one, because I couldn't. So yeah, let's move to the next one. And it is again from Trace Reaper. And he asked, is it possible to tell if you are imagining progress versus truly making progress on the path? For example, if someone says, I achieved enlightenment, or I am getting closer to enlightenment. And how would you tell the difference between imagining progress towards enlightenment versus truly making progress? I think I will just answer as best as I can, and then you can add something. Well, in general, I would say that there is one thing that you could look out for, and that is the amount of suffering you experience. That is pretty much your guide when it comes to progress, or when in the actual teachings of the Buddha. If you suffer less, given the same circumstances than before, then you are likely moving in a good direction. If you suffer more, then not too much. So overall, your suffering should diminish, because that is pretty much the only goal of the Buddha's teachings. Suffering less. And apart from that, well, if you don't have the right view yet, you have no confirmation. So the only thing that you can use is, in my opinion, the amount of suffering that you experience given the same circumstances you might have experienced suffering in before. If it is less than before, then that's a very good sign. If it is more than before, then not so good. Maybe you have something to add?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much agreed on everything. I would say it is possible to imagine progress, in the sense that you can, through your practice, like gain a certain level of calm that wasn't there before. It doesn't necessarily mean you're making actual progress on the path, because the suffering that's diminishing that Klaus was talking about is that suffering that like you literally cannot suffer, even if you wanted to. And that level of suffering, it's different to some people's practice. They may gain some sort of calm from it, but it's not the same as that. So yeah, it's possible to imagine progress, but all you have to do really is just ask yourself, some sort of disastrous situation, my health goes down and someone dies, can I suffer? If you're doubtful of that, then the answer's no. I mean, the answer is yes, you can suffer, which means no, you're not enlightened, which means there's more work to do.
No.
So, yeah.
But yeah, I think there is maybe one distinction to be made. The Sotapanna, the person who have reached the right view, can still suffer to some degree, but the majority of it is just gone. So that's maybe also kind of important. So that is a point of confirmation, but it's also kind of impossible to miss, in my opinion. It's not like you can miss the right view. You either have it or you don't. And
the Buddha says, like if you have the right view, it's impossible to like fear death, for example. So it is very drastic, that level of freedom from suffering.
Yeah, so the fear of death is pretty much gone. I don't think it's there anymore. You have a bigger frame of reference. I don't know how to put it, but that fear is gone. And that fear is typically there for everyone who has not had the right view yet. So it's kind of a dominant quality in their lives. When something bad happens.
Think about death and it doesn't affect you.
Yeah. So that is something that you could ask yourself. Just be honest with yourself and ask yourself tough questions that would make you suffer. That would make other people suffer. And you see if you are still suffering from that. If the answer is no.
It's probably also good to say that you probably the only time where you can say you've found enlightenment or whatever is when you've reached that. You can't really say that you're getting close to enlightenment. You can't really, like the Buddha gave that simile where like the carpenter is using his tool and it's getting like shaved off little by little, but he doesn't really know whether it's, you know, this much is shaved off. Yesterday we shaved off this much. It's got this much left to go. He just all wakes up one day and says, "Oh yeah, it's shaved off." And that's kind of the experience. Is that you're practicing, you're patiently enduring, and then someday you realize, like, yeah, I just cannot suffer from things I used to suffer from.
Yeah. And the important is that it's a cutoff point. It's a gradual training up to that point, surely, but it's a very distinct shift, which is very important. And you either had that or you have not had that. So it's maybe important. So you can imagine progress, to wrap it up. But you can use suffering as your guide as well as honest self-interrogation. This is why self-honesty is kind of necessary to make progress. A teacher can help you a bit by calling bullshit on you if you are clearly still suffering and deny that from yourself. But yeah, I guess we could move to the next question before we use too much time. Again, from Trace Reaper. Is seeing the self, as mentioned in this lecture, the end goal? If not, what is, and how can you be sure you are not lying to yourself about teaching it? Maybe you? I think it was one of the first lectures.
Yeah, no, seeing the self is not the end goal. The end goal is cessation of suffering. And seeing the self is part of that, basically. It's a means to an end. Because, yeah, there is lots of doctrines about self, which are not really what the Buddha's talking about. So, you know, a lot of people can like read the sutras and think, yeah, this Buddha guy's got a massive ego, thinking he's like fully enlightened. He says a lot of things which seem like, you know, he thinks a lot of himself, but no, he's completely not got any sense of ownership. So that's the way you can realize you're not lying about it, is the extent to which you see the self is the extent to which you can't suffer. And that's basically it.
No, I don't think I have anything to add there. It's very important. People often try to make Buddhism about non-self, about self, about jhanas, about whatever. But in reality, it is about suffering and how to not suffer anymore. This is very important.
There's so many times in suttas where like people ask him, like, is your doctrine about this? Is your doctrine about this? And even if it's sort of accurate, you're always like, nope, it's about suffering and the cessation of suffering. That's it. That'll keep you on the right path, basically.
It's so easy to get sidetracked, and the Buddha always kind of pulls people back onto the straight track. So it's leading pretty much straight to enlightenment, if they do it rightly. No. Okay, next question is from Carrot Exauxi again. Does our prayers affect the state of the universe and future consciousnesses, hence affect the karmic rule? In my country, many people go to the pagoda to pray for health, money, having partners, etc. We do have place to pray to ancestors, worship in our home. I don't believe in it much, just feels it goes against the karmic rule. Okay. Well, I'm not too well versed on many of the traditions that people follow around the globe. I think Saif can add much more on that. But overall, I would say there is an effect, but it's a tiny one when it comes to a prayer. But it does depend on your intention why you do it. So why do you pray? To help others, to alleviate your own suffering because it makes you feel good, because you expect directly any karmic results. Even then, would be much better to do other things, in my opinion. So there's nothing without effect, pretty much, but the effect of those practices is much more akin to very direct rituals and rules that the Buddha condemned. Not even those that are listed in the first fetter; those are something different. But this is a very good instance of a rite and a ritual that people just do without much effect. There is some, but very likely not much.
Yeah, it's much more. It'll be much more helpful to like follow the precepts, develop virtue, and so on. Especially even just for health and money, having partner, and so on. That would be much more useful. There is, I think, I don't know if you can confirm. There is like a sutta where the Buddha does say, like, yes, praying to like ancestors specifically, like those that have passed away, is like a positive thing. But yeah, it's not like a necessary part of the path or anything, but yeah, it's can have some effect. The Buddha says that that's a thing that exists.
No, I think that's maybe very much akin to the merit belief, that you make a good merit to have future benefits that you could enjoy. And the Buddha was very clear that there is a kind of hierarchy when it comes to generating good merit. And the things that they are stating here are very much at the bottom, that there are many more good things that you could do that lead to much better results much faster. Like, as I said, keeping the precepts, practicing what the Buddha said, practicing sense restraint, enduring, and all those things. Because to be honest, all kind of success, no matter if worldly or spiritual, work based on the same principle. Namely, restraint, endurance. Any type of success works based on that. So, rather do that and don't pray too much. The next question, this one is for Saif, and it was asked many times. What is jhana and how do I attain it?
Okay, this is a big question.
That's a big one, yes.
I guess you could say jhana is the culmination of practicing the entire Noble Eightfold Path. And culminates, well, not the final culmination. Final culmination is Nibbana, but it's basically the closest thing to it, where you basically overcome the hindrances, so surmounted craving, and you're just enjoying the pleasant abiding of not craving and not suffering through development of all the previous elements of the path: right livelihood, right effort, sense restraint, virtue, precepts, mindfulness, alertness, moderation, eating. So you develop all that, and then yes, you're abiding in a mode of being, lifestyle that is just free from craving. And that's the jhana, that's the concentration where wherever feeling appears, you're not going towards it, you're not going away from it, you're not going distracting yourself from it. So wherever arises, you're completely composed in regards to it. And you settle into that, and that's the jhana basically.
Yeah, that's very different from how many other people teach the jhanas, by the way. But the description Saif gave is actually perfectly in line with the suttas, while basically all other jhana descriptions are not. They, in my opinion, they are cherry picking. They're cherry picking examples that are in line with their descriptions and are often misquoting the Buddha and everything else. So that might be something to look out for.
Yeah, one thing that's like very cherry picked often is that like jhana is temporary liberation of mind. Keyword being temporary. So a lot of people will take that as like sort of evidence that jhana is this thing where you concentrate on your object and then temporarily you get this pleasure of freedom from the hindrances and so on. But the temporariness of the jhana is like, it's very different. It's very durable in the first place. Like if you're in jhana, it's your lifestyle. You can basically spend your whole entire day in jhana. You can spend basically your entire lifetime in jhana. That's like monks before the Buddha were doing that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But they are right that it's a temporary liberation of mind. But it's temporary not because it's like the state that you enter for like an hour a day, but it's because in jhana, the roots by which craving can appear are still there. So like literally you could spend your entire lifetime in jhana as monks before the Buddha did. But you will still be subject to rebirth because you haven't uprooted the being or craving. And then eventually, at some point, you will return back to low states and you'll be back to square one, back to craving, back to being absorbed in the senses. So yeah, it's temporary, but the temporariness is like on that scale of like your whole lifetime or aeons or so on. And that's why jhana can be a basis for going to Nibbana, because you have that perspective of I'm in this freedom from craving and it could last aeons, but it's still unsatisfactory, still impermanent, still not self, and that's how the mind jumps towards Nibbana. But it's not a thing where it's like jhana is this thing they enter for an hour a day. It's much more durable, much more. That's why the Buddha always says like the arahants, they're always absorbed in jhana and so on.
Mm-hmm. There's also one of the citations or one of the suttas, the Buddha explains that he can walk in jhana, he can talk in jhana, he can do all kinds of things in jhana. And the commentarial text always add a small footnote to those descriptions and say, it's obviously after the Buddha gets up from his concentration exercise and then he's free. That is not what the Buddha explained. He explains that he can be in jhana during all those activities. And it's actually a frequent topic of debate, as I understand it, if you can enter jhana during walking meditation.
Or you can walk without craving.
Obviously.
Having some amount of craving. And you're enjoying it. It's pleasant abiding, while walking, while talking, while moving, while saying, while lying down. Yeah.
You can do all that without craving, which is very important in my opinion. So it's more, the jhanas the Buddha explained are more than what most people interpret as jhana. And also one more remark that I would like to add is pleasure is not the defining characteristic of a jhana. The Buddha was very clear that the pleasure that you experience in jhana is due to the seclusion and not due to the jhana. The jhana comes first and then the pleasure is a byproduct and not the pleasure marks the jhana or something like that.
That's why when you settle in jhana, the pleasure fades away.
Exactly.
Because the jhana it's just equanimous. It's just that when you're free for the first time, it's incredible. You're completely free now and joy rises.
Yeah.
But then you settle into it and it's just back to calm.
Yeah. That is also important because the jhanas progressively get less intense and less joyful. The Buddha was very vocal about that, while many jhana teachers explain jhanas as progressively more nice states. In a sense, they are more nice because they are more peaceful, more equanimous, but they are not more pleasant by conventional standards. I think that answers that question. The thing is, Zoom just informed me that we only have 5 more minutes before the session runs out. So maybe we make a short cut here. Stop the recording and then continue afterwards. Okay, hello everyone and welcome back. Sorry for the short pause. Our recording software sadly only allows us to record for 30 minutes probably, but that is perfectly fine. I will just edit that into one video. Okay, the last question was about jhana, and this question is about stream entry. What is stream entry? And this is also subject to so much debate nowadays that I can understand how people can be confused about it. And I think we can actually say a few things about that. So stream entry and the right view that the Buddha described are actually more or less the same thing. Stream entry is the first stage of awakening, and it marks a point where you are basically free from suffering and you understand what the Buddha talks about. You pretty much start understanding the language that the Buddha spoke. So there's a transition point from virtue, which is the weakening of craving through restraint and enduring, and then you transition to uprooting of craving by wisdom, namely by understanding dependent origination and what the Buddha was really talking about. So at that point, you uprooted 99% of your suffering, if not more, so that it cannot arise again. And this is very important. It's not that you found a way to intelligently and quickly manage your suffering by immersing yourself in an absorbed state of mind. No, it's simply gone. If you wake up the next day and realize that all your money is gone, that's actually kind of fine. If you would die in a few days from now, that's also kind of fine. It's still not perfectly fine, but it's much less dread-inducing than it was before. So this is pretty much stream entry, I guess. And it's also important. It's kind of called stream entry because from that moment onwards, the entire practice becomes more or less automatic. The practice is doing itself in a sense. It's like you are swimming with the stream down a mountain with Nibbana as the goal. And the only thing that you can do in that situation is swim against the stream so that you are not getting there as fast as you would get otherwise. So that's pretty much the etymology. Maybe you can say a few words about it.
You've pretty much said everything.
Maybe there are a few myths that we could address or something like that.
Yeah, the popular idea that we've had in the past is that since Nibbana is obviously, it's often talked about as the undetermined, always these ons, which means that it's completely separate from kind of the 5 aggregates and so on. This idea of stream entry, where it's the first time you see Nibbana, and it's this gap in your experience, where everything sort of fades away, and that's Nibbana because it's the undetermined basically, which is not the right idea of stream entry. simply because there's just no understanding in that experience. It's just a thing happens. You have an experience, basically. Whereas stream entry, it's none of that. You don't get any gap in the experience or anything. You've weakened craving, and you've seen with your own eyes that 5 aggregates are subject to cessation. And you become unable to suffer because you've just seen that it's completely impermanent, and now you just can't cling to it. That's why I like the phrase that comes along with stream entry all the time is you directly see all that arises is subject to cessation, and that's exactly what you see. Not that there's a gap in experience. You just see that everything's completely impermanent. Doesn't matter what. Even the jhanas, they're just subject to the same cessation.
No. Maybe one more remark. There can be certain gaps in experience, I guess. I think I have experienced one or two during meditation, but there was still knowledge. So it's fine if you have such an experience, but the awakening or the stream entry that the Buddha talked about is not about having experiences. It's about understanding what you are experiencing in its nature, and not just having an experience. It's not something that you experience. It is the way you relate to experience as a whole that changes from that moment onwards. I think there's also a phrase from the Suttas where the Buddha, or where people who encountered the Buddha pretty much always say, it is as if something that has been overthrown is turned right again. And in my opinion, that's a very, very fitting explanation of the experience of understanding the Dhamma.
Yeah.
Your entire experience.
Basically, normal experience is yourself comes first and everything else. And then you realize, everything else comes first and myself comes second, completely upside down. And then the self fades away and you can't see self anymore completely. And,
as soon as you recognize the self or understand what self is, it becomes non-self because it's not there.
Yeah. And that's why after that you're guaranteed Nibbana, because after that you can never ever take anything as self. You can never take anything as satisfactory again, even if you wanted to. That's why automatically, just as a normal being automatically slides towards sensuality, if you're a Sotapanna, your mind automatically slides towards renunciation because you've seen it with your own eyes, basically.
Yeah, no, that's actually exactly it. So after stream entry, there's just a few more things to do. You pretty much have to overcome the taint, so the remaining stuff that is still there, and that varies a lot actually according from person to person. So some people have more taints, some less. There was even the statement in the suttas of a person who was drinking every day after stream entry, but I think that's more or less recorded because it's a special case.
Yeah. I mean, even if they're drinking totally, they can never see that drinking as something that's pleasant. They still completely see it as something that's not worthy. They're just too ingrained in their habits, basically.
Yeah.
And still, they don't ever suffer anyways when they're drinking.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, but then again, I don't really see a reason why you should start drinking after stream entry, because you don't have to cope anymore. Yeah. Maybe if you have been drinking heavily before, then you would continue that habit for a while, but that soon would fizzle out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else on that, or should we proceed to the next question?
We could talk a little bit about the fetters, the drop off.
Oh yeah, that's actually true. Yeah, the 3 lower fetters pretty much. That's also a good one. I mean, those are pretty much a belief in rites and rituals, a belief in a permanent self, and doubt, being affected, subjected to doubt. You want to say something?
Yeah, so along with the doubt thing, the Buddha often says that a Sotapanna is independent of a teacher. It's basically saying the same thing. Is you've completely seen the entire path for yourself. You've seen impermanence, you've seen what it means. So you don't. That's also why there's no more rites or rituals, or sometimes it's translated as rules or precepts or virtue and duty. There's no more grasping of what you need to do or anything like that. You know exactly, basically, what you need to do, and you just need to finish the job, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they all fall at the same time because they are facets of the same thing, pretty much, in my opinion.
Yes.
So if you have seen the self, or have seen what must must be done, and then there is no self, then the rest just follows from it. You had confirmation at that point, so there's no more room for doubt. And there's no more room for going astray, pretty much, because you understood what must be done. So all those three fetters just fall off. They don't fall off one by one, they fall off all at once.
Yes. And also, like, because these fetters are dropped off, also you're safe basically from ever going below the human state as well. You can't fall back to the lower states of hell or the animal realms or so on. So that's another positive, gives you confidence and safety. Yeah.
I think it does give a lot of safety, especially for people who are very much immersed in the more mythical kinds of beliefs. So many people nowadays are not very much into rebirth and everything, or heaven and hell and afterlife.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's another thing, is that the dropping off of doubt also comes with complete and utter confidence in the Buddha.
Yeah.
So a lot of the things the Buddha says, you will end up just after stream entry, you will develop the powers to see it yourself, or you will end up just taking it on faith, because you've seen the sort of profundity of the Buddha's teaching. And so when he says that you're free from the lower states, that is a case for joy. You will be like, okay, I believe what you're saying now.
Yeah, that is true. That's actually perfect confidence in the Buddha. I don't think...
You kind of pass it over in the sutras a lot, but he often talks about he has faith in the complete enlightenment of the Buddha. And even if you have the idea of, I know, I trust the Buddha, it's not the same as when you have that direct experience and you have complete and utter confidence to the point where you can literally, it's impossible to ever take another teacher again.
No. You have seen what the Buddha was talking about, literally. So there's no more room for any kind of doubt. There is confidence. From freedom of doubt, there results confidence. And it cannot
Even if everyone else in the world said you're wrong, you'd be like, no, I'm good.
Yeah, but you have seen the non-self, you have seen the anicca, you have seen all those things. So what else is there? And you can't unsee it. It's impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that's it. People will probably ask about that still as a follow-up or something, but let's just move to the next question. Okay, also asked many times, if everything just happens, why do anything at all? Which is an umbrella term that I have formulated for lots of different questions. If everything is non-self, unownable, uncontrollable, why should I do anything at all?
No? The reason is because you do actions that are against that principle. Yeah. You have self-view. You crave and you try to change that which arises by self. And as a result, there is suffering. There is lamentation, sorrow, despair, and so on. So you have a duty basically to conform to the way things are. And that means you're going to have to exercise effort and willpower into conforming to everything just happening. And then, once you've conformed to it, you don't have to do anything anymore. You've laid down the burden and everything sort of happens automatically from now on. There's no more doing yourself. But before then, you have to make the effort.
No, that's actually very important. And again, it is still important to mention things are still happening. Body moves, body eats, body talks. All those things are still there. But the sense of ownership is gone. So now those things are happening and you are not doing them. But before that, you are doing things because you have sense of self and you must act through it, cultivate the good kinds of craving to ultimately overcome craving. Because you are not acting at all in line with that. Because if you were acting in line with the principle of Dhamma, then you wouldn't have any self and would be free and liberated. But if you are not free and liberated and unable to suffer, then you have self and must act through it. You cannot deny that part of your experience. It is there. There is sense of self for the unenlightened mind, and they must act through it to ultimately overcome it. That's one of the questions I get the most, because some people in their practice always encounter that. They get a glimpse of an understanding of what this non-self is, what anicca really means, namely that things are happening on their own, and then they jump to another extreme, namely to complete passivity.
And one thing to keep in mind is that it's not that there's the Buddha say there is no self. It's with ignorance, there is self. With the fading away of ignorance, there is the self fades away. So yeah, there is self. It's just based on ignorance.
Yeah, that is actually the most important aspect, I think, in some regard. The Buddha did not say there is no self. that is something that people believe all the time, actually, everywhere. He did not say that.
Especially, it's completely against the principle of dependent origination.
No.
Understanding that word.
No. With ignorance, there's craving. With craving, there is self. Without craving, without ignorance, there's no longer self. So there is self at first, and then there is no more self. It's actually quite simple.
If you have the right things, if you're mindful, then the self fades away.
Yeah.
So does.
And that's actually very important, because I think that is a key view that hinders people at some point. Or at least on our Discord, we encounter that very often. And people ask it all the time. Yeah, I think we could move to the next question. And this one is also asked many times. Why are there so many different jhanas, and what distinguishes them? I have condensed that down from many questions that I have received. Whenever someone new joins our Discord server, then they often are very much interested in some kind of jhana or another, and it's often very much tied to one teacher or another. So we have, well, I personally have encountered maybe 10 different teachers and 10 different jhanas. And they obviously differ from one another on how to attain them and how they feel and whatever. So now we have 10 teachers and 10 jhanas, and they obviously can't all be what the Buddha taught. So that's the first observation that we make. And what is similar between them is that they are kind of all nice feeling states. They are experiences, and people like those experiences because they are in some way calmer and more subtle and more sublime than what they are used to. So that's what characterizes their jhana. So whatever they experience that is out of the ordinary is usually a jhana for them. So we have an entire class of experiences. That is what people call jhanas, simply because they feel nice and sublime. But niceness and sublimeness is not necessarily what makes something a jhana. This is very important. So in my opinion, that's pretty much the reason why there are so many different jhanas. And what distinguishes them is pretty much different teachers teach different ways and different motions and rituals and whatnot to get there. There's the mind illuminated, and there's Lee Brasington's jhana, Ayakema's jhanas. There are lots of different jhanas. And they are all different, so they cannot all be the same thing that the Buddha talked about. Maybe you have something to add about that.
What do you think is the best way for someone who doesn't have the right view to try and ascertain for themselves what is the correct jhana? What advice would you give? Since there are so many different ones.
No, that's actually a very good question. Well, I would personally look for craving, to be honest. If you can identify craving before or at any time in your experience, then it's very likely that whatever you are experiencing is not jhana. So many people want those states to arise, those jhanas to arise. So if you want those jhanas to arise, then it's very likely not the jhana the Buddha talked about. So it's one way of looking at it. Yes, many people experience anticipation for their jhana. So that's how you could recognize a wrong jhana. And a right jhana, well, you pretty much need the right view for the right jhana. So unless you have the right view, then it's probably not the jhana, at least in modern times. There were teachers who could practice the jhanas at the Buddha's time, but nowadays I think that's very, very unlikely.
Today, if you're withdrawing to the point where you're entering jhana, it's basically impossible not to arrive at the right view. So yeah.
The Buddha's teachings are everywhere. You can get them at the click of a button, if you wish.
Everyone's heard of not self, If you're in jhana, you will see not self very naturally.
Yeah.
Won't need to be effort really.
Yeah, there's actually no effort in seeing non-self at all in jhana. It's just there. Just recognize it was always there.
It's like the sutra, it says that if you're immersed in samadhi, you don't have to make the wish to say, may I see things as they really are. it's only natural to see things as they really are. So yeah, if you're in jhana, you will see it. It's 7 factors of awakening are there.
No. The thing is, it might be necessary to make a distinguishment between samadhi and jhana. Jhana is a culmination of samadhi, and samadhi is, well, composure. There can be very composed states that are not yet a jhana, but still have a lot of perception of non-self. But it's possible. So that's maybe another source for errors. So the state of jhana is pretty much completely free from any ignorance. So that's
the jhana is very lofty. If you can get to jhana, you're very advanced in the book, basically.
And it's pretty much impossible to attain that before stream entry. That's also very important. So it's still good to strive for it. So because you have to do all the prior steps, and you do them with much more vigor, I guess, when you want to attain jhana. But you will likely have a point of confirmation before you actually enter the jhana. No. I would not think too much about the different kinds of jhanas, and would actually just practice what the Buddha recommended to practice for your level of progress. So if you are not yet having the right view, practice what must be practiced to attain the right view, and jhana will come as a byproduct.
Yeah, jhana is very lofty. If you're not like developing virtue and sense restraint and seclusion, moderation, eating, that needs to be the thing that you focus on. And then with time, jhana will come. The basis needs to be there first.
No.
Otherwise, there's no possibility of entering jhana.
No.
Oh. That's actually a good way to recognize that. If someone says you can enter jhana just by doing like technique, even though you don't have precepts or sense restraint or seclusion, it's probably not the correct jhana.
No.
What the Buddha was talking about.
Tero likes to call it non-activity. That's actually a nice way of phrasing it. It's kind of intuitive, but it's only intuitive when you had the right view. Before that, it makes no sense at all.
He talks about sometimes there's like no activity that's based in distraction.
Yes.
Which is a good way of thinking about it. Like you can still act if you have purpose to it. There's not distraction, not sensuality. But otherwise, your mode of being will be like thoughts arising, desires arising, but not acting out of them.
No.
Unless there is purpose.
No. It's actually a good way to phrase it. Yeah. Let's continue to the next one. And that is from Kared Zauxi again. Can I ask why I usually feel my nape, I think that's another word for neck, get hard to firm while meditation after some time of focusing on my breath? Whenever I realize it, I have to loosen my arms. It happens quite often. And this is a remark from myself. This question probably applies to all kinds of nagging pains and problems in meditation. Yeah, feel free to give it your take.
I'll go answering this first.
Okay. Yeah, well, it depends on the kind of meditation you do. When you are doing sitting meditation in an uncomfortable and unadapted posture, then you will experience pain. If you are not sitting upright, then there's also pain. There are all kinds of sources for pain. This is not necessarily a bad thing. You can use it as something you can practice you are enduring from, as an example, because pain feels bad and we have a natural tendency to shy away from it. By not doing that, it can be quite a good practice, I guess, or it can be a good practice overall. But overall, just sit upright, try to maintain a somewhat healthy posture, and your meditation should be all right, or your body should get used to it. But overall, you don't have to confine yourself to just sitting meditation. Again, the liberation the Buddha was talking about is not just while sitting. This is very important in my opinion. What you should do is just not act out of greed, aversion, and delusion. And it does not matter what you do, or what your body does, or how your body is disposed, and while you don't act out of it. Oh. I don't think I have much to add otherwise.
Yeah, it's very dependent on the type of meditation you do. But like with the non-activity we talked about before, since non-activity it's very much sort of, there's no real like muscular effort involved. It's all about just withdrawal basically. And so usually with that, there is just calmness with the body. And a lot of the time when you sort of withdraw from acting out those desires and distractions, the sort of muscular tension you've hold up will just be released naturally. Whereas some meditation techniques, when it's like often it's a lot of effort of holding things together, will end up like developing that muscular tension in the body.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a good way of putting it. Whenever you have a goal that you really try to achieve, then the body usually also gets very tense and tries to do that and emulate and help in attaining your goal, but it's not necessary. So when you do it right, then calmness of the body pretty much has to be the result.
Yeah. We'll talk about often like joy rises, then bliss, then tranquility of the body. Always. Yeah.
I think during the lecture I also gave you, or will give you, well, from this point of view, I gave you a citation where I go through 7 different kinds of pleasant states that are all there before a jhana even arises. So all the pleasures, all the seclusion and everything is there before concentration or samadhi culminates in jhana. Yeah, so if you feel tense and meditation, maybe practice a bit more non-activity if you can. Just a bit of restraint, a bit of not trying to achieve any kind of jhana or specific goal in meditation. Just don't act out of the unwholesome. Yeah, let's move to the next question. This one is from Clayco. I have got one question. If there is no self, meaning no control, who is responsible for one's actions?
It's similar to the question beforehand, but yeah, you're responsible because there is self at the beginning. But yeah, like there is self at the beginning, so you are responsible for your actions.
Yeah.
Then when the self fades away through the practice, then you kind of let go of responsibility because you will be unable to ever act out of any unwholesome thing again. And so you'll be on training, you've laid down the burden, and then you can just relax basically. But until then, you do have responsibility to the extent that you still have self-view.
Yeah, and whenever there is self and you recognize it, well, when you recognize it, it becomes non-self, but your practice should be dedicated towards overcoming the slight traces of conceit that are left. But at that point, when you ask that question, you should work towards the right view, because that is still missing. Because at that point, the question, if there is no self, can only arise if you don't have the right view yet. So this is kind of important. So there is self until there's no self anymore. This is maybe the right way of putting it, or a very useful way of putting it. Because the entire training that the Buddha described is pretty much about no longer misunderstanding your experience as a whole. And when you deny your sense of self that is clearly there, then you cannot overcome it. So you are responsible for your actions until you are no longer. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, next question from Vretty117. How does one practice when one is content? That's a good question. Do you want to answer or should I?
Go ahead.
Yeah. If you are too content, make yourself less content. Try to increase your restraint, as an example, and you are no longer as content as you think you are. If you remove something that your sense of well-being depended on. This is, I think, at least as I understand it, that is why the Buddha recommended living in the forest. It's not very comfortable. It's not very cozy in many cases. It's hard to enjoy the environment in a forest in India or in ancient India. So it's hard to be content there. So you have to have a mind that is quite lofty to enjoy that, which is kind of important. So whenever you create a problem at hand for your mind and make it see that there is still some suffering left, then you will work on that problem. So you kind of can create an environment where there is some discomfort, and then you will practice to overcome that discomfort based on the right view. Otherwise, you will probably just avoid it. Well, anything else?
Yeah, that's pretty much it, to be honest. The only thing that you could do wrong really is like slide into too much asceticism for no reason, basically. So it needs to be like the most immediate thing that Flav said would be like, yeah, tightening sense restraint would be more than enough. Like withdraw from distractions, abide in the non-activity, and then yeah, like the anxiety will start to arise because everyone is sort of dependent on distractions.
Yeah.
Or just this winter, don't put the heating on for a day, or miss a meal or so on,
Huh?
and see if it affects you.
That's actually quite good.
All of a sudden, think about like situations that might make you suffer, and keep it in mind. And then, if you do suffer, if you think you might suffer from it, then use that as motivation.
Yeah. That's actually how it should be done. Just undermine your sense of safety in some way or another. And ownership kind of always is tied to safety, permanence, and all those things. Undermine that in some way or another, and your contentment will fade, and then there will be all the things that you have to experience and endure, and then the practice will advance. Might be necessary to say that this applies to the practice of someone who does not have the right view yet. You won't be able to experience the same kind of dread that you will experience, that you have experienced before after it.
Yeah.
No, but if you have the right view, then you would not. Then you know what you must do. So we can pretty much assume that all those questions are directed or are from people who have not yet had the right view. Anyway, let us continue with the next question. And this is from Discord, but I found it interesting, so I put it here. So it's not from the YouTube comments. Sometimes I have picked one from the Discord server where people have joined, sometimes from YouTube. Oh, the time is running out again. Yeah, so Rojo asks, lately I'm trying to hold the first precept a bit more seriously, which in turn means killing less flies, mosquitoes, and might mean more bites to me. Do you think there is a benefit in doing this?
For that specific thing, as long as like you're not getting like, it's no like a possibility of like danger and illness from such things, and it's just like enjoying a bit of extra comfort, then yeah, something like that would be very beneficial. But again, it's the same with the asceticism thing, is that you don't want to like make it go too far. Because yeah, the Buddha did say things like you need to if you're not enlightened, you need to not put yourself into situations in which you might be killed before you get enlightened. So like avoid like ravenous animals or like really dangerous places and so on, because there is real danger there. And if you die while unenlightened, then you kind of wasted it. But if it's just a bit of discomfort, then something like that, it's good to enjoy. Yeah, that can increase the stableness of the mind and the strength of the mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, overall, killing obviously should be avoided because it's not really possible to do that without craving in your mind. Presence of craving is a necessary condition for killing. It's not possible to do otherwise. Surely people can die as a result of an accident, of an action of yours, but then the intention is not there. So if you sit down or step on the grass and there is an insect under you, it's not killing. So that might also be important to know. Your intention determines if something is killing. So yeah. But apart from that, exactly what Saif said. Yeah, since the timer is already running, maybe one more question. And this one is from an anonymous Bhikkhu. How do I know if someone is a Sotapanna? So if someone is actually trustworthy in teaching me, let's put it like that. Yeah, well, I could just give you my opinion on that. First thing is, you can't know that. As someone who does not have the right view, it's not possible. You cannot recognize that, really. You can make an effort, and there are good steps that you can undertake to make sure that the probability of being wrong is small. But overall, the full confirmation can only be there when you have experienced and seen what the Dhamma is. Then you can see it in others. I think there's also a verse from the Therigatha that says exactly that. One who sees who sees who doesn't. That's pretty much the phrasing. And this is exactly right. So when you have the right view, you can recognize others as having the right view because they can tell you that specific way of relating to things with the right kind of significance, and then you can be quite certain. Yeah, apart from that, you should make sure that the person in question acts in line with what they are teaching and act in line with the suttas. The suttas are pretty much your ultimate point of reference as someone who has not yet developed the right view, because they are right. They are, even logically, they are closest to what can be right. And if you go by faith in other people like Saif or me here, then we can say to you that they are right. We have read them, nearly all of them, and I could personally confirm that they are right. So most of them, not all, but the vast majority. And you can do that too. So see how much a person or a possible teacher is acting out of greed, aversion, and delusion. And if they are very well restrained, very well acting in line with the suttas, then chances are very good that they can be a very good teacher. But you have to do that for a long time, obviously. It's not just one day or something. Oh.
Yeah, the suttas are your refuge, basically. So the Buddha gave the advice that if someone like told you like this is the teaching, this is the practice, he said, no, don't affirm it or don't deny it, but then compare it with the suttas. And yeah, that's what you should do. And don't just cherry pick suttas as well. Like if you're practicing jhana, for example, don't just look at one description of jhana, but like look at it in the context of the entire practice, basically. Like, is this person telling you to develop virtue, like the Buddha said? Does he tell you that celibacy is good, seclusion is good, and so on? If so, if they're like teaching the entire path, then it's a good measuring point for whether they should be trusted or not. But again, like Flau says, you can't fully know until you cross Sotapanna yourself. So you should, suttas are your refuge.
Yeah. Well, that's actually a very good summary. You should read the suttas, and not just interpretations of the suttas. I know that it is very inviting and enticing to do so, because it's probably easier to understand for a beginner to opt in for some knowledge that is more modern. But it's actually very good to go, at some point at least, to the basics, to the original texts. Even look up different translations if you have to, because there are some monks who very likely don't have the right view, but are still translating texts, and they are not necessarily translating the texts in the way that they should be understood. And this is something that every practitioner will learn at some point, if they are serious about it, that some translations are better than others. This is something I would look out for. But yeah, as we only have like 5 more minutes of talking left, I would suggest that we make a break now and continue in a while. Okay, hello and welcome back everyone. We will now continue where we left off last time with the next question, this time from John. And he asks, what are your thoughts on rebirth? Maybe Saif can answer that.
I will give my personal thoughts on it, but
yeah.
I think the right attitude to have towards rebirth, if you have an analytic mind and don't feel like having faith in it, the right attitude to have is basically agnosticism. Simply because if you have like some definitive view on the afterlife, it's more than probable that you're doing it from a perspective of self-view. Basically transcending your setup of birth and death to say what happens after it, even though you're completely enclosed within the 5 aggregates, which are subject to dissolution, which are subject to death. So you're given a perspective that's external to the 5 aggregates, which means you're having a perspective from self-view. So if you just simply have like a Gnosticism towards rebirth, the idea that there's a possibility that there is something that comes after. You didn't have any choice in your birth. You didn't have any choice in the setup of like your state of being, how you were born, where you were born, your faculties, and so on. You don't have any choice in death. So you don't have any guarantees with regards to afterlife in the exact same way. So if you basically have agnosticism towards rebirth, and you contemplate that, you are also contemplating the right perspective of not self, non-control, contemplation of death, and so on. And that will take you towards basically the right perspective. Because this definitive view of not having an afterlife is a place of safety, basically, where there isn't any. You don't know. Yeah.
Yep, that's actually the perfect opinion. In the Suttas, when monks heard a story or a view or an opinion of another person, the Suttas always state, neither agreeing nor disagreeing with that opinion, they went to the Buddha and asked him. So the right attitude is to tell or admit to yourself that you do not know. That's all it takes. You don't have to be perfectly convinced that there is a rebirth, and you don't have to be perfectly convinced that there is no rebirth. You cannot confirm. You can go by faith in the Buddha, which is perfectly fine, but an outright denial is a place of safety. Yeah. I think there's not much more to add.
I mean, if you develop jhanas and so on, it is possible to confirm these things for yourself, but
Yeah, if you are inclined that way. There are people who are not inclined that way, by the way. The Buddha's chief disciple, Sariputta, could develop jhanas and all those things, but he could not see. He did not have any supernatural powers. I'm not even sure if he could see his past lives. I don't think I have encountered that. But I'm not sure. Well, maybe he can, maybe he can't. The point is not everyone will necessarily experience those things. But if you really want to know, then it's very likely that you can. There's even a sutta that says, if you really develop samadhi, then you can realize any state that you wish.
Wow.
But you must wish for it. And it can be the case that you don't really wish for it anymore once you have the right view, because it's not really relevant for you anymore.
Yeah.
No. Anyway, let us continue. This one is from an anonymous person. Can seclusion be unwholesome? Yes, technically it can be, to a degree. This, again, depends on if you have the right view or not. If you have the right view, I don't think that seclusion can be unwholesome anymore. If you don't have the right view, then seclusion can be unwholesome if done for the wrong reasons, as an example. If you spend time in seclusion and have no access to the teaching as a result of that, but you need that, then that's a bad thing. That would be a bit unwholesome. In general, it's much better to be in seclusion from time to time, and it's much more wholesome in general as a rule of thumb, but it can also be unwholesome, in my opinion. No?
Yeah, another thing you could say is that you can, if you don't have the right view, like Flau says, then you can go into seclusion for purposes of basically sheltering you from the world, giving you a sense of safety. So it's quite possible that you develop seclusion, you develop sort of a joint seclusion, but then when the seclusion is interrupted, the mind sort of goes crazy. So that's basically a good way to measure whether your seclusion is wholesome, is that if it's interrupted, the mind still doesn't move, basically. That's the product of the correct seclusion, is that you're removing craving. And so even if it's interrupted, the mind doesn't move.
I think there is, I heard that from some monk who learned under Ajahn Chah, and he pretty much developed many of the absorption state of mind in seclusion, and his mind was very lofty, and he got interrupted by another person. And as a result, he had all kinds of thoughts of murder even towards the person who interrupted him. So that person was not doing the right kind of seclusion. So his mind was still very much moved, and they had attachment towards those states of mind.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Seclusion it's about undermining safety, not creating more safety. So
yeah. No, that's a good way of putting it. So it can be unwholesome, but most of the time it's better to do more seclusion than less. The Buddha said that those forest-dwelling bhikkhus should reflect frequently if their dwelling alone in the forest is beneficial before the right view, and they should come every fortnight to the Sangha of bhikkhus to receive teachings. So that's a good way of going about it. Yeah. Well, let's move to the next question. This is again from another anonymous person. If Nibbana is permanent, how does it work with the Buddha having been on Earth? Well, I'm not exactly sure how to understand that question. First of all, maybe there is a misunderstanding when it comes to Nibbana, I guess. So thinking of Nibbana as permanent might be not so useful. All we have is experience of cessation, experience of non-self, experience of Nibbana, pretty much. And that is very much dependent on the body. So, but I'm not necessarily understanding how that relates to the Buddha being on earth, or having been on earth. So he attained Nibbana, and that leads to no future rebirth. So he was here while he still had a sense of self, and once his sense of self was gone through attaining Nibbana, he no longer had a sense of self, and then he was no longer confined to the circle of rebirth. Maybe you understand the question in a different way.
Yeah, I don't really understand it fully, but yeah, I mean, for an arahant, the 5 aggregates still exist, and externally, that's what someone sees, and someone could see then say that's obviously impermanent, but they're not someone who's achieved arahantship is no longer defined by the 5 aggregates. That's why the Buddha, when someone asked him what kind of being is he says, I'm not a human, I'm not a deva, I'm not this or that. I've completely uprooted that which could make me into any being and all. The rebirth has been completely pulled out, and that's what Nibbana is. So while the 5 aggregates still exist, they exist, but an arahant is not defined by them anymore.
No. Any kind of self-theory, let's put it like that, always kind of requires the 5 aggregates as an aid of even formulating any kind of being, pretty much. So when there's no longer any self-view, you are no longer defined by the 5 aggregates. Yeah, I hope that answers that question. Otherwise, the person who asked it can just ask a follow-up question. Sometimes it's a bit difficult, and there are barriers to understanding. Anyway, let us continue. Again, another question from Garrett Exauxi. How many realms do we have in a rebirth world according to the Suttas? It's a more interesting question than most people might think. I will just answer them as best as I know. In early Buddhism, I think there were 5 general planes of existence. Later, there was added another, I think, a 6th one, and it's pretty much Hell realm, the realm of hungry ghosts, then the animal world, the human world, the world of the Titans or Asuras, and then heaven, pretty much. So those are the general planes of existence. And then there are all kinds of different heavens, pretty much. Overall, I think those are 31 or something like that in total, but I'm not exactly sure.
31 or 33, I can't remember.
It's quite a lot of different kinds of heavens. Heaven of the 33, heaven of the 4 kings, the Brahma world. Then for every jhana, there's another heaven, even higher heaven. Wow. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And the strength of your craving pretty much determines your rebirth. The more jhanas you can attain, the higher your rebirth, pretty much. And at some point, you'll become a non-returner and will go to a world from which you will never return, because you will attain liberation there. Because your mind is so lofty, no longer tied with the 5 senses, no longer tied to any body, to a form. No? Anything to add?
In terms of realms, it's not really related particularly to the question, but the Buddha often talks about the human state being a very rare realm to be reborn in as well. So that's something to, if you're agnostic with regards to rebirth world, it's still good to contemplate that, could be reborn anywhere else, and then you might not get the human state again for a very long time. And also, the descriptions of the hell realms are they're not places you want to be in. Let's put it like that.
Very graphical descriptions. It's not safe for work to put on YouTube, but you can read up those stories in the suttas. I think one sutta that I linked quite often is concerning the pleasures of heaven. And right after or right before, the Buddha explains the perils of hell in a very similar way. And it's very graphical, and you could read that up for yourself. It's a good sutta. And
that's why the Buddha says, like, even if you do sense restraint your whole life, on account of that sense restraint, you're like in pain your whole life because of that restraint. Still, is very good for you because you won't go to hell wrong, because you don't want to go there.
You really don't want to go there. Yeah, that is true. I think the Buddha gave a simile when it comes to human birth, and he compared that to a turtle, or to a tortoise, swimming in the ocean, a blind tortoise, and once every 100 years that tortoise would surface. And if by sheer good luck he would hit a yolk that is swimming in the water, that is the probability of someone attaining the human state. And it's actually very slim, as you might imagine, because there's a lot of ocean, there's a lot of places where the tortoise can be, there's a lot of places where the yolk can be, and only every 100 years you surface and make that lucky shot. So
it's extremely rare. And in a lot of senses, it's better being human than like in the heavenly realms as well. Because there's more chance to practice.
Once your karma is used up, your good karma is used up, you are very likely to be reborn in hell after being in a high heaven. And you had some time you could enjoy there, but it's much better to be liberated from it altogether, in my opinion.
That's like something we mentioned, like with regards to jhanas before. If you have insight, you'll see that like unless you uproot the existence, you'll be reborn back in heaven, but then you can be back into hell, back into all the different states of being, still impermanent, still unsatisfactory, and so on.
Yeah. You could compare it to, I don't know, playing a video game. I think we did a video about that in the past. It's like having to play the same video game over and over again. And you have seen through all of it at some point, pretty much. And you see, I will have to start again, knowing nothing, losing all my memory from the beginning, going through the entire same thing over and over again. And you simply see that that is not worth it. And this induces dispassion, and that is pretty much what Nibbana is. Another synonym for Nibbana is dispassion.
Yeah. That's why, like, if you have insight, it's like sensuality is just like this absolutely burning thing which you will never want to touch, because you'll see it'll bind you to samsara and this infinite aeons of never-ending. So, like, sensuality. It's when you see it correctly, it's not good.
No. You see that there is some gratification in it, but a much greater danger. That's a good way of putting it, and the Buddha phrased it like that. And it's good to cultivate the perception of that, the perception of danger in sensuality, and frequently recollect it. No. Okay, let us continue to the next question, again from Carrot Zauxi. Are Darwinism and rebirth compatible?
That's a big question.
That's a good question. I will give you my view on it. I think they simply apply to different domains. Darwinism is more or less content-centric, while the Dhamma transcends content altogether. And if you mean by rebirth the teachings of the Buddha and everything related to that, then they simply apply to different domains. You can still use science to gain knowledge about the world, about the content of your experience. So it's no problem. And Darwinism, or at least evolution as an algorithm, as a way of how things change, as a description of how things change, can be quite useful. But the assumptions science in general makes are not very helpful when it comes to spiritual practice. That's how I would put it. Darwinism has a useful domain where you can apply it, but the spiritual domain is not necessarily that useful domain.
If you're a Darwinist, there's no spiritual life associated with it. So it's kind of a moot question altogether.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's different.
No, that's actually a good answer.
There's also like in some suttas, like the Digha Nikaya Sutta, where it's talking about the different beings, like the coming of humans. The Buddha talks about more there, like about humans being like they're products of evolution, It's more like de-evolution, where it's like this long process of like higher, more lofty, refined beings become more immoral and so on. And then as a result of that, they fall to the human state. It's a very different image on compared to Darwinism. But whether you believe in it or not, there's like a spiritual life associated with it. And there's consequences of being moral, for example. Whereas in Darwinism, if you like take it as a normative value, things like evolutionary psychology and stuff, it can like take you to places where you think being immoral is good. It's going with the stream is good, basically. Whereas Buddhism is the opposite.
Yeah, that's actually a very good take, and very much something to look out for. If your worldview can legitimize doing unwholesome or evil things, and that is possible for a lot of worldviews that are out there. And those should be avoided when you try to reach liberation of mind, because those things directly go against the principle of Dhamma. Oh, I think that answers the question. Let us continue with another question from Carrot. As it is about understanding your experience, should I read Suttas as a beginner even if they are too hard for me?
Yes. There are a lot of suttas that are like much more complicated in how to understand, but especially if it's like associated with like earlier parts of the practice, things like conscience and concern, precepts, stuff like that. That's all like stuff that's can be understandable from a beginner. But also in general, there's suttas are your only refuge. You can't really understand otherwise. Otherwise, you're trusting secondary sources and might be wrong. Suttas is the only thing you can trust. So yeah, you should read them, and they'll get easier.
No. They also have reread value. This is also something important. So if you had some insights and then go back to some suttas, then you will very likely discover or rediscover things that you have previously just glanced over and gave no attention to. This is something that happened to me quite a lot. I mean, I've started reading the suttas quite early, all the Nikayas pretty much, and in the beginning I did not understand at all, and over time my understanding got more and more refined, and then you can suddenly, obviously, understand what is in there, and you no longer miss those things that are very important. And to be honest, basically all of it is important. If you think something is not important, then it's very likely that you don't understand fully yet.
Is that sutta where the Buddha says, like, yeah, it's nothing can be added, nothing can be deleted from the path. It's completely, everything's contained, perfect, from the beginning, middle, and the end.
Yeah. That's how it is, but you will very likely not see it like that. You will have identified parts where you think, I know that already. I know that already, I don't have to do that. And whenever that thought comes up, then you should be very careful. Unless you already know that you have the right view, where you really know, based on your own experience, that certain things must not be done by you anymore. It's very likely that your mind is just looking for easier ways to reach a certain states or something. Well, I think that's a good answer for that question. Let us continue with another question from Clayco. How do you balance that in our modern society without having to give up all sensual pleasures? Everything I want to treat myself with, anything I wonder to which extent I can just enjoy it and to which extent I should abstain. I think that's a question that pertains to sensuality as a whole, and a person who is worried that they cannot enjoy things that they previously enjoyed anymore. You want to?
I mean, the truth of the matter is basically that sensuality in general is just bad, no matter what it is. So if you're developing the right sort of perceptions and so on, yeah, you can have dispassion towards all sensual pleasures. You can't just have some sensual pleasures and abstain from other ones. I mean, you can do that, but you'll only get partial benefits, and you're not really seeing where the whole problem is rooted.
No.
So yeah, it doesn't mean you have to become a monk or anything, and especially if you live a lay life, that's why you practice it gradually. Because if you even if you just follow the precepts like very strongly, that's not something that's like huge. But you practice it, and the blamelessness and the joy that arises from that, it will develop into discernment, and then like sensual pleasure will automatically, you'll notice if you practice it, it'll start to drop off automatically, because the pleasure of virtue is just more durable and better. So if you practice gradually like that, the evaluation of sensual pleasures will diminish slowly, and then you'll be able to see it and be joyful at that instead of trying to just abandon it altogether.
No, that's actually a good way of putting it. What I would like to add is that what you deem worthy or worth having changes over time. I would not give it too much of a thought right now. If you are scared that you might lose something right now, I would just put the question on the sideline and just continue practicing. At some point you will notice, oh, what I wanted to have in the past is no longer worth having right now. I mean, you can just look back into your own past. What did you want to have like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago? Chances are very good that you are completely dispassionate about your desires of the past by now. And so if you are afraid of losing something right now, just put the question to the side, keep practicing, and by the point you will have the right view, you are very likely so dispassionate that you no longer want to have all those things. And it's a very pragmatic approach, in my opinion. I mean, you are having the experience of dispassion already. You don't want your teenage dreams anymore, your childhood dreams anymore, and all those things, very likely. And it's really just the same. You cannot enjoy building sandcastles anymore. You cannot enjoy playing with puppets anymore, simply because you are dispassionate towards it. And the same kind of dispassion will also happen towards sensuality, even if you deem it worth having right now. Ultimately, it is not. You are just ignoring that fact. Yeah.
Yeah, gradual training though, so you don't have to completely abstain from everything immediately.
It's gradual. That's very important. You don't have to give up everything right now. Anyway, let us continue with another question from Trace Reaper. He asks, will you know when you have the mundane right view, or can you still question if you are seeing clearly or not? I think if you only really have the right view after completion. I'm not fully sure if I understand the question correctly, but the first part I think I do understand. Will you know if you have the mundane right view? Well, I think the mundane right view should rather be interpreted as an attitude of self-honesty, of responsibility, of all those things, than as something that can have a point of confirmation. In reality, only the real right view, the stream entry, is a point of completion or confirmation that is unmistakable. The mundane right view is more the right attitude, the fertile ground to attain the right view. If you deny parts of your experience that you do not like, if you ignore the suttas because they don't seem suitable for you or something like that, if you have all kinds of wrong views in progress in regard to the Dhamma, is not really possible. So the only real confirmation of the mundane right view would actually be the attainment of the real right view, I think. Then you know that you have been doing it right for quite some time. But
yeah, when you have the right view, then you can no longer be dishonest to yourself. It's impossible to do that. But before that, it's mundane right view. It's a matter of degrees. You need to intensify it and develop it. So you don't know fully until you have the right view.
Yeah.
But even taking on the spiritual path itself it's the beginning of the mundane right view. You can know if you're practicing, then yeah, you're starting to get there. Because there are people who are nihilists and so on, think actions don't matter and so on, and there is no spiritual life for them. It's no hope really.
Yeah, they tie themselves to suffering pretty much by holding on to those views. Yeah, I think that answers that question. Let us move to the next one. This one is from Xauxi again. My question is, does the Buddha see the circle of rebirth real and many other things? I hope that's the question. Can the Buddha see that, the circle of rebirth? Yes, he can see rebirth. He knows how beings reappear according to their karma, pretty much. He knows and sees that. He has the three true knowledges, pretty much. The knowledge of karma, the knowledge of past lives, and the knowledge of this passion, of Nibbana. And much more. The Buddha has more knowledge than all of us, very likely. At one point in one sutta he said he picked up some dirt or something from the floor of a forest and asked the monks around him, which is more, the dirt that I just picked up or the forest around us? And all the monks obviously answered, the dirt is less, the forest is more. And the Buddha said, the small amount of dirt in my hand, this is what I'm teaching you, and the forest around you is all the things that I know. And he knows a lot of things, but not all of them are very useful for liberation. No? Anything to add? I'm also not quite sure if I understand the question fully.
I mean, in the question at the end, it says just by understanding.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess you would say that like the opening of the divine eye is not just simply a case of understanding. He also does like directly see it through the divine eye and so on. Whereas there are other monks who just have the understanding and they develop the knowledge of the ending of the defilements, but they don't develop the divine eye, see beings reappearing and so on, like Sariputta that we mentioned before. So yeah, it's not just by understanding, but there is no opening of the divine eye without understanding and without detachment from the human state, basically.
Yeah. So those things are necessary preconditions for the opening of the divine eye and the divine ear and all the other powers, but they are not necessarily the result of the training, as I understand it. Some have it, some don't. For most people, or for many practitioners, it simply did not matter. For them, it was of no concern. Why should I want to hear gods or things like that? For me personally,
yeah, it's definitely like I see a lot of people in different paths. They can have like a lot of attraction to these powers and so on. But the Buddha was very adamant about like them not really mattering, basically. And it is, if you don't develop attachment, but you develop psychic powers, you can get like lost in them and so on. So the focus is on liberation.
Yeah, that is very important and something that you should really ingrain into your mind. Buddhism is about suffering and how to stop it, and pretty much about nothing else. Everything else is just a byproduct or a means to an end.
Yeah, his byproducts can develop if you develop jhanas.
Sometimes don't. Okay, next question. Again, one from Sauxi. If we can get rid of suffering by understanding the Dhamma only, by following the Noble Eightfold Path without needing meditation, it means meditation is just for a group of people who need to get mindfulness before getting to understand the Dhamma. I think that question relates to one video where I'm quite vocal about the fact that much of the formal meditation methods that are taught nowadays are not necessarily what the Buddha taught back in the days as meditation. And strictly speaking, you need mindfulness. You need strong mindfulness to discern, to have insight. But you don't have to do the formal meditation methods that people do nowadays to cultivate that mindfulness. In essence, you just have to not act out of greed, aversion, and delusion for a sufficient amount of time, and then all the other things will manifest, pretty much. So the mechanical methods of watching your breath, counting your breath, or whatever people do nowadays, that's not, strictly speaking, necessary. You can do that in the beginning if you wish, and there are some benefits to it, in my opinion, but even that can be debated. If you do it right, then it requires you to endure, as an example. It requires you to do many things right that you did not do right before. This is why many of the meditation methods do work to some degree. But in my opinion, they give you a false sense of confidence, which is not good. Then you start clinging to some kind of method and want to repeat it over and over, and that's not so good. So the group meditations that people nowadays do, well, I guess many times they do it to feel better, to generate some sense of calm and all those things, but not necessarily to develop understanding of the Dhamma. Even if they say that they want to understand the Dhamma, oftentimes they have gone a bit astray, in my opinion. No? Anything to add?
Yeah, that's pretty much agreed. You can also instead of having like a narrow image of meditation as being this thing you do when you sit down, focus on your breath, these types of things, you can just think of the Noble Eightfold Path as a whole as meditation. Because yeah, even if you're just following just the beginning, you're just following the precepts, that is meditation. Like you're withdrawing from craving, you're mindful of your intentions, you're developing discernment, you're developing insight into where the actions are rooted, whether it's unwholesome. All of that is leading, that's all meditation. And if you think about it more broad like that, you can think about living a meditative life rather than doing meditation.
No.
Yeah, everyone who follows the Dhamma is then doing meditation.
Yeah, that's actually a good way of putting it. Everything that is in line with the Noble Eightfold Path is meditation, and that's a good way of looking at it. Sometimes the jhanas are translated as the first, second, and third, and fourth meditation. That's another way, if you want to, can look at it. And before that you are practicing, which is also fine. But meditation should not be regarded or confined to just the meditation cushion or sitting postures. Do we have time for one more question? I cannot read the timer. Maybe you have it.
6 minutes.
How many?
1 more.
One more, okay. Another question from Sauxi. My question is, does the Buddha can see... Oh, we already had that. Well, maybe another thing. There's some repetition there. Okay. Maybe we start there. About liberation of lay people. How can it be possible if we have a partner, having children and give birth, being involved in social society deeply? Well,
liberation of lay people is definitely possible. But you can't really be involved in social society super deeply or make it your passion and so on. There needs to be some withdrawal from distraction where it's not needed. But if you are a layperson and you have lots of duties and so on and you're busy, that's fine. But it needs to be to the degree necessary and not proliferating further and using the excuse to engage with sensuality and distraction where it's not needed.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Buddha said three things that make the Sotapanna's progress slow down is work, talk, and sleep. So it's all just basically just distraction. So yeah, your progress will be a bit slower as a layperson, but it's very much possible. Many lay people were liberated in the suttas.
No. Yeah. I think there's one sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya where the Buddha literally counts the people who have attained stream entry, who have attained the state of once returner, non-returner, and arahant. And there were quite a few lay people among those, thousands even. So you can very much attain the right view as a layperson. That is absolutely possible. There are people nowadays who think that's not possible anymore, even in the monastic community sometimes. But it is possible. It's very much possible. And even more is possible, especially nowadays, as you don't have to invest as much time as before to maintain your livelihood, pretty much. So I think Tero also said in one of his videos that it is very much possible as a layperson to become an arahant, but you cannot live like a layperson. You cannot be immersed in sensuality anymore and all those things. Which is a critical difference. Most people live to cover up their suffering. And yeah, you cannot do that anymore. You will not see value in that. And thus your actions will not follow from that in the same way they do follow for other people who are still immersed in sensuality. You cannot enjoy the same things anymore. That's maybe a good way of putting it. So you don't want them anymore, you are dispassionate towards them, and thus you will live differently. Yeah, I think that is enough for today. Thank you very much for listening to our short discourse or questions and answer session. I think we will have to do another one in the future, But thank you very much, Saif, for being here and for helping me out on those questions. I think your opinion is very valuable to other people, and your background in philosophy is also very helpful, even though our opinion on the Dhamma is very similar. But then again, I guess the opinion of most people on the Dhamma who actually practice is very similar.
Yes.
Yeah.
Post the next one.
Yeah.
Questions away.
Yeah. Post questions down below. If there are other ones, feel free to also ask questions to the Q&A. And until next time, we wish you a pleasant day and goodbye.